As India gears up to host top world leaders at the G20 Summit next month, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is set to embark on a state visit to India, coinciding with his participation in the G20 Summit. While the summit is scheduled for the 9th and 10th of September, the Saudi Crown Prince's state visit will take place on the 11th. The visit holds considerable diplomatic importance as it involves the highest honour extended by the Indian government, including a guard of honour at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the official residence of the President of India. So what can we expect from this visit? Investments and different elements of the strategic partnership between India and Saudi Arabia will top the agenda of Salman's trip. In June this year, Salman spoke with Prime Minister Modi on the phone to review different facets of the bilateral relationship. Prime Minister Modi also expressed appreciation for Salman's support in the safe evacuation of Indians from war-torn Sudan. This visit is taking place in the backdrop of major political, social and economic reforms initiated by the Crown Prince and the Saudi-Iran rapprochement. Saudi Arabia, which recently hosted a meeting on the Ukraine peace deal, maintains neutrality on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. India-Saudi ties, which have gained momentum in recent years, have seen an increase in defence cooperation and Saudi investments in India. Now, the visits of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the Saudi Kingdom in 2016 and then again in 2019, and the state visit of Salman to India in February 2019 marked a new era in the bilateral ties, which culminated in the setting up of the Strategic Partnership Council, or SPC, co-chaired by the two leaders. Saudi Arabia plays an important role in India's energy security, as it is one of India's largest sources of crude oil and LPG. The Crown Prince came to India earlier as the first Deputy Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia. This time, he comes in his capacity as the Prime Minister of Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia has become a key partner for India in the West Asian region. The announcement of Saudi Arabia's inclusion as a member of the Brics grouping further solidifies its importance on the global stage. In terms of trade, Saudi Arabia ranks as India's fourth largest trading partner. Energy security is a critical facet of this engagement, with over 18% of India's crude oil imports originating from the Saudi Kingdom. Now, in the fiscal year 2022, bilateral trade between the two countries was valued at almost $30 billion. The 2.2 million strong Indian community is the largest expatriate community in the kingdom. Compared to his predecessors, Prime Minister Modi has expended more energy in scaling up ties with the kingdom. He's emphasized that Saudi Arabia is India's maritime neighbor. As a mark of personal goodwill for Prime Minister Modi, in 2016, Saudi Arabia conferred its highest civilian award, the King Abdul Aziz Sash, on him. At the height of the COVID pandemic, India provided 4.5 million vaccines to Saudi Arabia, while the latter provided India with liquid oxygen. So just how significant is this visit by the Saudi Crown Prince to India, and what does it signal about India-Saudi ties and India's Middle East policy? All right, let's try and dissect this with our panel of guests tonight. I'm joined on the show by Ambassador Achal Malhotra, former Indian diplomat. Also with us on the show is Ambassador Manju Seth. And completing the panel, as always, we're joined by Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. All right, Ambassador Achal Malhotra, let me begin with you. Now, this isn't the first time that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is undertaking a state visit to India, but this is definitely the first time that he's coming in his capacity as Prime Minister. And a state visit is significant at so many levels. It is really the highest honor that India can accord to a visiting foreign dignitary. How do you view this visit? How important do you think it is for India-Saudi ties, and what does it really signal?
Well, I think, the Crown Prince, for all practical purposes, is the leader of Saudi Arabia for now and for future. And the kind of, uh, welcome that we are planning to extend to him reflects the level of current level of relationship between India and Saudi Arabia. Historically, we have had very good relations. In the 50s, I think there were landmark visits from Saudi King and from Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru at that point of time. There was a bit of lull in between, but from 2000 onwards, I think the relations have been on the move. But in recent years, I think they have picked up very well, and this is reflected in more than one thing. From our point of view, this has been a part of our outreach to the Islamic world in the Middle East and West Asia and North Africa. From Saudi point of view, if you look at the Vision 2030, which has been launched by the Crown Prince, it aims at social transformation in the country and also diversification in its economy, moving away from the energy. And in this context, the scope for collaboration and cooperation between the two countries stands, very wide. And our relationship, which for past several years was revolving around energy security and diaspora, has also expanded. Brics, as you mentioned, now they are a member of G20 already, and they are now going to part of the Brics also. So the institutional mechanisms through which the two countries will be collaborating with each other is also very important. Also, our closer ties with Saudi Arabia and UAE and of late with Egypt also has helped us reduce the nuisance value of Pakistan on international fora, where they have been finding every possible opportunity to, put to defame India or to tarnish India's image. Nobody is now taking them seriously because there is a realization that in South Asia, or in the entire Asia, if any country that matters is India. So there is a larger context. You mentioned about trade. I think there is a lot more scope because 30 billion, in my opinion, is not enough. And out of this 30 billion, most of it accounts for the import of oil by India. So balance of trade is not in our favor. But investments also 2 billion, 3 billion. But looking at future, I think this visit is going to definitely lay the roadmap for our expanded future collaboration, which will be facilitated by our desire to strengthen relations and Saudi desire to meet the aspirations of their Vision 2030. Over to you for the time being.
All right. Thank you, sir, for that perspective. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Ambassador Manju Seth, let me ask you, ma'am, according to you, what does this visit really tell us about India's Middle East policy? And, the two countries that Prime Minister Modi has made a very special outreach to and personally invested in the Middle East are the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Why do you think that is the case?
Of course, as mentioned already by Ambassador Achal, it is a very important outreach. Our Look West policy is to reconnect and to reinvigorate our ties with the countries in West Asia and Middle East. And I think as part of that, we are further strengthening our relationship. We established what is called a Strategic Partnership Council in, I think, 2019. And I think that has two aspects to it. One is the economy and political aspect, and one is the trade and investments and energy security. So these two sort of initiatives will go a long way in further strengthening our ties. And Saudi Arabia, we know, is a very important player in the Middle East, in West Asia. And the Crown Prince is now looking at transforming his country as well, making it into a modern economy. And I think on that, there's a lot of scope for collaboration between India and Saudi Arabia. That is another significant aspect of the visit. And as you know, Saudi Arabia and India ties are further sort of strengthened by the huge Indian diaspora that we have working in Saudi Arabia, and they have acknowledged this. The Crown Prince has also acknowledged it. Saudi Arabia has acknowledged that the role of the Indian diaspora in modernizing and in building Saudi Arabia. And that connect, I think, is also very, very strong. And at the same time, I think Saudi Arabia, though I know China has been active with Saudi Arabia and Iran relations getting on an even keel, but I think Saudi Arabia understands the importance of its ties with India, and for that, and he's reiterating that after the G20, he's going to continue a special state visit. And India also understands the importance and the strength and the importance of this visit, so that we can further look at our neighborhood. It's an extended neighborhood, and you said Connect West and Look West policy is an important part of our overall foreign policy. And I think this visit will further cement the strong ties that we already have between India and Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Thanks for that, ma'am. Shri, I want to ask you, a two-pronged question. Firstly, how do you see this visit? Secondly, yes, India, Saudi Arabia have enjoyed strong ties over the years, which have been further cemented by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his tenure. But, we also cannot completely ignore the fact that Saudi Arabia is, in fact, close to two of our biggest adversaries, Pakistan and China. I know diplomacy is all about, balancing acts, but what do you think this balancing act really is like for India and Saudi Arabia? And our ties, of course, go beyond just oil and the Indian diaspora.
Right. So, Neha, to my mind, one of the biggest foreign policy wins of the Modi government has actually been in the Middle East. And unfortunately, that has not got due recognition or credit from either media or from critics at large. Ambassador Malhotra mentioned that India has had relations with the Middle East start going back to 1950s, which is pretty much from a time of independence. But for the longest time, Neha, India always looked at the Middle East as only a source of oil and foreign, remittances from our workers there. I think it is only under the Modi government that there has been a very significant and conscious engagement of Middle Eastern countries, including Saudi Arabia, including UAE, as strategic partners. We talked about the Strategic Partnership Council. Now, if you look at what's really happening, the SPC is moving Saudi Arabia and UAE from basically just trading partners into investors into India. So that's a very big shift which is happening. Saudi Arabia since 2021 has invested more than $3 billion in India. And you'll remember that Aramco, which is Saudi Arabia's largest oil company, it came almost close to investing $15 billion in Reliance Industries. So what Prime Minister Modi and his team, they're doing is basically getting Middle East to invest in India's growth story and prosperity, and therefore move the conversation from basically about a political relationship to a joint prosperity story, where even as Saudi Arabia envisions a future which is going to go beyond fossil fuel, although Saudi Arabia has 237 billion barrels of reserves, which are proven reserves, which means they can carry on for 70 years at the same rate of production. But they are preparing for a future where fossil fuel will necessarily become less significant, even if they have reserves. They're looking at alternative fuels becoming significant. So the direction in which Saudi Arabia is moving in terms of its own future, and that is where I think the Modi administration is driving the collaboration with these countries and giving them an opportunity to get a play in a country like India, which has a huge scale, huge population, and huge opportunities, and a lot of strengths, not just in manufacturing, not just in services, but also in new energy. So that is a very important shift, Neha, which is happening under the Modi administration. So you talked about Pakistan. Yes, it's true that both Saudi Arabia and UAE were closer to Pakistan because of obvious affiliations. But I think under MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, there has been a shift towards India in some sense. And they realize that India is a very key player in this part of the world. Finally, Neha, one thing which I want to mention, that the Modi government made these moves in the Middle East at a time when the US was actually abdicating or retrenching its own role in that market. Uh, one of the ambassadors talked about how China came in and brokered the peace deal between Iran and Saudi. I mean, that was inconceivable, right? A few years ago. It happened in March this year. So this happened because US basically let go of that opportunity to be the big power in that market, and therefore India's moves at this point when US is like vacating its role or creating vacuum, and China is coming in. India's moves, bringing these people, these countries, and making them part of India's success story is, I think, is very, very important, and that's a huge foreign relations win, to my mind, Neha, which I think has not been appreciated enough in our country.
That's very interesting indeed. India, in a sense, stepping into a void created by the United States. And the United States ties with Saudi Arabia have, in fact, significantly deteriorated in recent times, especially since the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war. Ambassador Ajal Malhotra, let me come back to you, sir. And I'm just playing the devil's advocate. Yes, energy security is a very important facet of the India-Saudi ties, considering that 18% of our crude oil imports come from Saudi Arabia. We've talked about how important the remittances that the Indian diaspora sends home are, and they do constitute the largest expatriate community in Saudi Arabia. Beyond that, you mentioned that India's closer ties with Saudi Arabia also means that it, in a sense, counteracts some of Pakistan's nuisance value. But how do you believe, sir, that Saudi Arabia is balancing its ties with India on the one hand and Pakistan and China on the other? Because Pakistan is a country that it's traditionally been close to. China is a country that certainly it seems to be gravitating towards in recent times. And as we know, these are two countries that India has very thorny ties with.
Yeah, what Saudi is doing is nothing new. Balancing your relations has become a trend, and I think we ourselves have been also doing that. On the one hand, we are having excellent relations with the comprehensive strategic partnership with the United States of America. On the other hand, we are continuing to have our close ties with Russia. And if things were in order, if China had shown, its inclination, we would have had a good relationship with China also. This is, I think, the trend now. Now, the fact that the India-Saudi Arabia relations are on the ascendancy, this has been possible for various factors. While in my opinion, it is Saudi Arabia's decision also to come out of the shell. Like it's no more only interested in, the leadership of the Islamic world. It wants to go beyond. The Crown Prince Vision 2030 has a very important role to play in this context because this is creating opportunities for both India and Saudi Arabia to collaborate in a manner which was probably not possible. I agree with my co-panelist when he says that Prime Minister Modi has really accelerated the relationship between the two countries. But I think the beginning was already made when strategic partnership was established in 2010. And now acceleration has been possible because from the Saudi side also this kind of an enabling environment has been created. Going to Pakistan, yes, Saudi Arabia will continue to patronize Pakistan for whatever reasons, Islamic solidarity. But you look at the if you look at the capacity of Pakistan to influence the Islamic world against us on key issues like abrogation of Article 370, 35A, Kashmir issue, many other issues. Pakistan has simply failed. So much so, Imran Khan was very candid in admitting it that their diplomacy has failed. Even the Islamic world is not forthcoming to support them. Now, this has been possible because of the vigorous, engagement that we have pursued, not only with Saudi Arabia, but also with UAE and some other important countries in the region. So Pakistan is a non-factor now. And if you, I recently was watching our external affairs minister participating in one of the TV channels where this question was raised: "Ki aajkal Pakistan Nobody's talking about Pakistan as they used to be talking in the past. He made a very interesting observation, and he said, it's a market kind of a situation. Nobody talks about the falling. If your share values are falling, then nobody is talking about you. So Pakistan, I think, has been reduced to a non-factor in our relationship with the Islamic world. One more point I just wanted to add was that, our outreach to the Islamic world and a positive response from them also has importance for us from our national politics, domestic policy also. After all, we have 15% of our population is Islamic, they are Muslims. And somehow, somewhere, it's going to have, in a way, it is going to act positively. Over to you.
All right. Ambassador Said, let me come to you now. Couple of questions for you. We know that Saudi Arabia is one of the latest entrants into the Brics grouping. Is that likely to have any bearing on the India-Saudi ties? And also, let's talk a little bit about the issues that are likely to come up when the two leaders sit down for talks on the 11th of September. Of course, they will discuss bilateral ties, but is the Russia-Ukraine war also likely to figure prominently, given that, interestingly, both Saudi Arabia and India have maintained a neutral stance on the war, refusing to take sides, and recently Riyadh even held peace talks in the hope to, find some sort of a way forward, though, of course, Russia wasn't invited.
Yes, absolutely. Coming to your last question first. Yes, definitely. The two leaders will discuss the ongoing Ukraine war and the never-ending Ukraine war. And I'm sure, because, India participated in this conference in Saudi Arabia, and they will discuss it, I'm sure, and see how to find solutions. I think G20 will also be focusing on it, and both leaders will also talk about it, definitely. And if you look at the entry of Saudi Arabia into Brics, as mentioned by, I think it was the Prime Minister himself, that, expansion of Brics was necessary given the changing dynamics around us. And it was hinted that similarly, the existing institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and the UN, Security Council, etc., all need reform and need expansion. So I think that aspect also will be discussed, and I think from Saudi Arabia has been supportive, but at the same time, as mentioned by Ambassador Malhotra, the Vision 2030 document that he spoke about is also looking at transforming Saudi Arabia into a modern sort of economy. Education, which was not given so much emphasis, is sought to be promoted. Universities will be set up, and if I when I was in Paris, I had some discussions with one of their embassy representatives, my counterpart, and he said that Saudi Arabia wants to transform itself into a modern country. Why should we be sending all our students and everyone abroad for study? And then at that time, this is about 20 years ago, there was not enough jobs in the country. So now what the Crown Prince is seeking to do is to transform his country, the economy, so that are jobs created there, SMEs are set up, and also it was mentioned to me that they would like to learn from India's experience in the SME sector, in the education sector, and entrepreneurship, kind of creating entrepreneurs, etc. So that was one. Just by the way, I mentioned this is another aspect that I think the Saudi government would be looking at to collaborate with India, given that, and digital, our digital outreach and our digital public infrastructure that has been put in place, and how easy it is to make payments. I think this will be another aspect, I think, that Saudi Arabia would like to benefit from. Universities from India's IITs and things like that, they would like to learn, I think. But of course, at the moment, or till now, or so far, they've been looking only at the West. But since it is an Asian country, there was mention of the fact that they would like to benefit or to collaborate with India as well on all these aspects, including SMEs and MSMEs.
All right. It is no doubt, a very comprehensive relationship now. Shri, let me ask you this. Both Ambassador Malhotra and Ambassador Seth have talked about the reforms that MBS has initiated in his country, the fact that he's seen as a modern leader who's trying to modernize his country. Do you believe that is an important factor that is, in a sense, contributing now to further cementing of India-Saudi ties? Also, I want to ask you this. There was a controversy a few months ago when OPEC countries, in a sense led by Saudi Arabia, decided to cut oil production. It was seen as a move to help Russia in the wake of Western sanctions, but a cut in oil production hurts India as well. Now, are these issues that are likely to come up when Prime Minister Modi and the Crown Prince sit down and talk?
Well, there's no doubt, Neha, that NBS has positioned himself as a reformer, and the outreach that we see happening towards India is definitely part of his plan to make Saudi a more independent nation with its own foreign policy decision making and not too reliant on the US. And one of the reasons why the falling out with the US has also happened because you will remember that the journalist in question was actually a Washington Post columnist, and he was a journalist who got
Jamal
murdered
Khashoggi.
Yeah. So now there was a point where the U.S. Congress had actually considered, that MBS should be held to trial in the U.S. And fortunately, that was shot down by the Biden administration. Otherwise, I think the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi would have soured even faster and more perhaps badly. So positioning of himself as the reformer is, of course, the reason why India is able to hold meaningful conversation with Saudi and the less focus on Pakistan from Saudi's point of view, although they have committed investment in Pakistan also. But the fact is, Saudi is now looking at a position in the global stage where it is able to make its own choices. And it's in some sense a signal also to the US that we will now make decisions, and hence it's closer ties to China and allowing China to play the peacemaker in its deal with Iran. And don't forget that China is also the largest oil customer for Saudi. So there is incentive. Now coming back to the point of production cuts. Now these are cuts that OPEC does on a regular basis to calibrate the oil prices, because they don't want oil prices to drop below a certain level, because then their own profitability is affected. And pretty much it's the only thing that OPEC has. It's one commodity which they have to sell. So that is the lifeline for these countries. So I'm not surprised that they keep cutting and production, and then when a lot of international pressure comes, they agree to increase production. So this is the market dynamics and countries trying to protect their own interest, Neha. But I think the focus of the conversation that happens between Prime Minister Modi and NBS would be on what are the areas where Saudi can invest in India, and how Saudi can leverage India's strengths to create a future which aligns with its Vision 2030 plan. Neha, I think that will be the thrust, not so much the mechanics of oil prices, although that is obviously an issue as India imports 85% of its oil. But I think the larger focus would be on how can the countries collaborate on investment and on economic front to create stronger partnership and closer alignment as we look after each other's interests in an evolving geopolitical scenario, Neha.
Interesting. So the focus is likely to be on trade ties and investments. We'll have to wait and see how this state visit pans out, but certainly it is one which will be watched with a lot of interest. On that note, Ambassador Achal Malhotra and Ambassador Manju Seth, thank you so much for your time and perspective.